is our first seminar speaker. Dr. Vanderah is a true wildcat, and I say that because he did all of his education here practically. So he did his bachelor's degree in MCB, then he did his PhD in pharmacology and toxicology. He is now the head and professor in the Department of Pharmacology in the College of Medicine, as well as, years up, co-director of the MD PhD program here. So if any of you are interested in that program, he is a good person to know. Dr. Vanderah does a lot of work, specifically on identifying the source of and investigating alternative treatments for metastatic bone cancer, which from my understanding is one of the most painful cancers you can have. He's done a lot of work in that area. He's co-authored more than over 170 publications, and he's a very busy guy. He's been a mentor in our labs for UBRP students and ASPED students. He teaches for the medical college. He's department head. He's also director of the Comprehensive Pain and Addiction Center. And for those of you who are in the Bachelor of Medicine degree, he helped develop that. So he's done a lot of things and continues to do a lot of things. He's won a lot of awards over the years, and especially this year, he was named as the 2023 Alumnus of the Year for the College of Medicine, and he was also recently recognized as a Regents Professor. So we are super fortunate to have him with us here today. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Todd Vanderah.
Thank you very much for that very kind introduction. Okay, well, it is my pleasure actually to come talk with you all. So I've been asked to give you a little bit about my history, and then I'm going to talk a little about my research. And as you saw with the topic there, the title, we're going to talk a little bit about cannabis, therapeutic applications of cannabis. Very interesting topic, and I'm sure that if I asked all of you right now what's your opinion on cannabinoids or marijuana and stuff, every person for the most part usually has an opinion. And it's somewhat unfortunate in the fact that your opinions are going to be built off of what you've been sort of told about what this is and whether it's useful or not. And often I'll give you a little bit, but I like to talk about the fact that we really know very, very little about cannabis and marijuana. And it's a plant, like many other medications that we've actually found and discovered from plants. And so I'm going to give you a little bit about it, but hopefully by the time we leave, you'll think maybe a little bit different about cannabis, just in general, not necessarily whether it's useful or whether it's harmful, because I'll talk about both. But first, I'm going to talk just a little bit about my career and my history, and I feel like one of the reasons I love to come talk to this group is that I was in your seat many, many years ago, though we didn't have UBRP back then. I was one of the first graduates from the molecular and cellular biology degree program here at U of A, believe it or not. And so I was really into the molecular biology. Prior to coming here, I was a construction worker, actually. So I didn't really think I could ever do college. So I love to tell people that. The fact that I came from a family from farmers. So I grew up until I was 12 in Iowa, and we worked on a farm. And basically, thought that was going to be my life until my father decided to move to Arizona because they were building houses, and he felt like he needed to get out of the cold winter, and farming was not the best as far as making a living. So he moved actually to the Phoenix area, and I started working construction. So I framed and built houses and realized that that's a lot of work, and you don't get paid very well. And I would look at my dad and I'm like, I do not want to be like that. I love my dad, but I did not want that career. So I started off in a community college, up in Phoenix Community College. I always liked science, so I thought this is kind of cool. And I started thinking that if I could actually maybe do college, then maybe I could actually maybe someday go to medical school. I don't know. I didn't know what else other options were out there. And so I finished Phoenix Community College. I came down to the U of A because I felt, well, if I want to do in the health sciences and stuff, why not come down here? There's a medical school here, and I'll try the university. So, like many of you, I came down here and tried school. It was rough in the beginning, like organic chemistry. Man, believe it or not, I ended up taking on organic chemistry as a big challenge because I thought, I don't even know what this stuff is, right? But I took it on as a huge challenge. And anybody have Dr. Eugene Nash? Somebody know Dr. Nash? Is he still around? Yeah, he may have retired. What's that?
He teaches the online section.
Yeah, he's the one that taught me organic chemistry. I know he's still around. And it's a funny story, but anyway, at the time, I thought, well, I'm going to go ahead and try this stuff. And, I get my first organic chemistry exam back, and I think I got a 12. I'm like, well, this is rough. I never had a 12 in my life. I'm like, how can I get a 12 on an exam out of 100 points? And so I right away went to his office. And, I went in there and I said, what is this? I don't deserve a 12. I mean, right? You guys ever thought that you were getting an exam back? You're like, wait a minute, I thought I did better than this. And he kind of gave me the whole dad talk and told me, you're in college now, son. Even though he's not my dad, he goes, you need to actually study. You need to do. And I was like, I did, I swear. And he goes, no, you didn't study, you got a 12. So he gave me one of those hard talks, and he says, I said, well, could I ever possibly even get an A in this class now at this point? And he said, well, I'll tell you what, because we were talking for a while. I wouldn't get out of his office, by the way. It's a great way to get to know your professors and go bug the heck out of them. So he says, look, there's going to be 3 more exams. You get an A on all 3 of these exams, and they'll give you an A in the class. So I studied organic chemistry like you wouldn't believe. And I did. I ended up getting A's in all 3 of the rest of the exams. And my grade comes out, and I have a B. I was so good. I went right back to Dr. Eugene Nash, and I said, wait a minute, you told me that you would. And he goes, I know, but if I give you an A, these other 4 or 5 students are going to get an A, because where you sit in the house, I said, I don't care, give them an A. And I said, you told me you were going to give me an A. So he did, but he challenged me. He says, you'll take the next semester of organic chemistry with me. You'll get all A's, and then I want you to be a student assistant, not a TA, because I wasn't a grad yet. He goes, because I think you can do it. So he did. So he challenged me, did it. Became actually a student assistant for organic chemistry. The one thing that I think I was failing at, and I ended up then started teaching organic chemistry. Can you believe that? Here at the U of A. And so, but of course during that time, I was trying to decide what I was going to do with my career. Medical school was all what everybody always talked about, and there wasn't many other options out there. So I thought, well, I have to do this. So I started doing volunteer work. I was teaching organic chemistry, doing some research in some labs over there in the hospital. And I started realizing that I liked the research, I loved the teaching, and seeing those patients down there at what used to be Keno Hospital, now it's South Campus, was not my favorite part of it. And I would go home a bit depressed every single time after doing that. I started realizing, okay, I need to find something else. And so I decided, I applied both MD, PhD, and I put the MD part of it, went and talked to the dean. I was on the list, and I said, I want to put off the MD part of this. I don't want to go to medical school right away, and I wanted to do my PhD. And so I did that. And so I ended up not only getting a BS here in molecular and cellular biology, but I also got a PhD in pharmacology and toxicology. Never went back to the med school part of it, but they hired me quickly after my postdoc. So I did do a postdoc up at the University of Colorado, or Colorado University, I should say. And the U of A called me back to come work here. And it was actually at the same time that this company called Ferring also called me. And I was always interested in pharmaceuticals. I was always interested in helping people. I just realized that maybe hands-on helping wasn't going to be my thing, but maybe doing research to help people. And so Ferring, this company, said, we want to hire you to run our biology. And I said, well, I'm just a postdoc, I don't know how to run a company or the biology part of the company. And they said, oh, it's okay. We're going to set up at the U of A. We're going to put our labs in the U of A because we need some facilities. We don't have them here yet. Ferring's a company that was over out of Paris in France. And you can run it there and you can be a professor. And I said, oh, great, that sounds good. I said, can I have the salary from the company? They said, yeah. I said, well, that's much better. So I took the salary from the company, but the university allowed me to come back and start teaching medical students. And so I've been teaching medical students almost since 1997. And I ended up teaching actually and directing the human nervous system block for the medical school. Anyway, during my time at Ferring, because I was only there for about 4 to 5 years, about 4.5 to 5 years, of course they moved all their operations over to La Jolla. But at that time, the U of A realized that I might leave, and so they offered me a tenured position as a faculty position in the College of Medicine. So I stayed. I happened to get married and had some kids in school, and I thought this is better. I'm just going to go ahead and stay here at the U of A and be a professor here, teach medical students, and do research. But during that time in Ferring, we were very productive, and I just read in there, I've actually developed 3 drugs, 2 that are on the market today. So one of them helps with preterm birth. It's an oxytocin antagonist, so often if a woman is pregnant and she gets in a car accident or has some other kind of trauma, you'll go into labor, and it goes into labor too early. And so the drug that we actually developed stops the uterine contractions, and so it works quite well. And so that's great. I feel like that was something I contributed to help people. The second drug is actually a drug that's on the market for prostate cancer. And so it's a generation patent for prostate. And the other one is still in phase 3 trials. So within that 5 years, we actually have 2 drugs that are on the market and a third that might be on the market soon. I did come into the Department of Anesthesiology. They wanted to hire me as an assistant professor as well. Pharmacology there also as an assistant and associate professor. I went on to become a professor. So this is kind of the trail you do. You do an assistant, then you go to an associate when you get promoted with tenure, and then you go on to be a professor. At that point, I had some offers to be department chair, and the Department of Pharmacology wanted me to be a chair. So that's how I actually ended up being that. We were all in a room one time, the dean was there, and they said, so we're going to need an interim chair. And I didn't realize that everybody kind of stepped back. I'm like, oh, I guess I'll do it. So I was the interim for a few years, and then they decided that they were just going to have me be a chair. So I became a chair, and then, as pointed out by Jennifer, this last year I became a Regents professor, which has been a really true honor, and I hope to represent the U of A to our Board of Regents and to the President, and try to really fight for the U of A. I've been here my whole career. So with that, I do a few other things besides teaching medical students. Again, I teach the human nervous system block. I also read a few books, and so these are some of the books recommended by most med schools around. They're sort of the smaller and easier read, but these are the first 3 books I started working with. I actually worked for many years with Dr. Jack Nolte, who was actually here at the U of A, and I learned a lot of my neuroscience with him. So he passed away several years ago, and I took over the books. I also have the pharmacology book that's often used in med schools as well as pharmacy schools. 2 of these, one's a bigger one, one's a smaller one, more for boards. So I do get to do some of the book stuff. And then, as Jen pointed out, I also run the MD PhD program. So anybody interested in an MD PhD, I'd love to talk to you. We get very, very few applicants from the state of Arizona, which I'm always bummed about. Most of our applicants are coming from either California or other states, but we're always looking for people who want to do the MD PhD program. And just a quick plug for that, you're paid the whole time. You get a stipend, and you don't have to pay for med school. It's a little longer, 7, 8 years, but you get both degrees. You get paid with the stipend, and you don't pay tuition for medical school or grad school. Okay, so that's me. I also started the Comprehensive Pain and Addiction Center, and so there's a huge need, as you guys all know, with the fentanyl epidemic or fentanyl overdoses and opiate epidemic. So several years back in 2019, 2020, President Robbins had an offer for strategic plans. I put one in, they sponsored this, and so we started a Comprehensive Pain and Addiction Center, in which there's really sort of 4 parts. We do preclinical research. You're going to hear a little bit about that today, where we design new things to help people with chronic pain or addiction. We do clinical trials, clinical testing. We do some addiction treatments, neonatal abstinence, in which, again, we're treating babies with new protocols, babies that are born to mothers with opiates. And again, we also do some education legislation component and some sort of what I call devices and technology areas, where we're doing things like brain stimulations for things like chronic pain or addiction. Okay, so that is a little bit about myself. I have a few minutes to kind of give you guys some of the research we do. I really wanted to look at new ways to help people with pain that weren't using opiates, but also not using any other substance that might be abused. And you think, well, why cannabis? Again, this is the idea, is that many people think certain thoughts about cannabis, but I want you to realize that there's over 500 chemicals in a marijuana plant. And there are many of them in there that are non-addictive, non-rewarding, and that may be very, very helpful for people with something like metastatic cancer pain. So just to give you a little bit of some of the recent facts, about 48 million Americans use cannabis today. Again, this is based on a survey of people telling the truth. But that's a lot of people, right? 48 million people, so it's 18% of the population. Just to put that in perspective, it is about all the population, I think, of California and Texas. Okay, and those are some great states, obviously, as far as numbers. So quite a few people. What you notice, though, first of all, you can compare it. So if you compare it to alcohol, there's about 140 million users. Tobacco, about 46 million. Tobacco is down. Alcohol is probably somewhat level. It went up a little bit during the pandemic and stuff, but it stabilized. But 140 million tells you that's, and if there's 300 million people in America, that's telling you there's quite a few people that might be using alcohol. Cannabis, though, 43% increase. It's by far the one that increased the most in the last few years. And of course, that's probably because some of it has become legal, or at least I say legal in some states, not federal. So the prediction, though, if you look at 43% growth, what I want you to also realize that by 2030, that means about 71 million Americans, which is 1 out of 4 Americans, maybe using some form of cannabis, whether it's edibles, medical marijuana, or other things. All right, so why look at that? Well, I've been very interested in trying to help people with chronic pain. And again, this comes to a personal story in the fact that my father had metastatic cancer pain. He had lung cancer. Most of the work that I've done so far has been in breast cancer, and there's some technical reasons why. But metastatic cancers, things like lung cancer, breast cancer, prostate cancer, they often go to the bone. And when they go to the bone, they become extremely painful. What do you think we give those patients for the pain? What's that? Opiates, right? Whether it's OxyContin or even more potent opiates, but typically that's what we're going to give them, right? And I have felt for many years that this wasn't good. And anybody that has had a loved one or a parent or knows somebody with metastatic cancer and you realize they're on opiates, they go very, very high in doses, and the patient, at that time was my dad, basically they're a zombie. They're out of it because of the opiates. So they're in pain and they're completely out of it. And so you think, wait a minute, we're in stage 4 metastatic cancer. The doctor says you may live for 3 or 4 months, and what's wrong? Well, you can't talk with his family, you can't visit, he's a zombie, and he's very constipated. And so there was all kinds of issues and problems. And this is an example. This isn't my father. This is a woman who has metastatic cancer. She ran a live web page site to kind of give people what's happening so people understand it. But all those black things all over her body are cancer. And when it's metastatic, that means it's gone everywhere, right? So it started in the breast for this woman, and it's gone everywhere. And her biggest and only largest complaint was pain. That's what this really says up here. And many people suffer from constant pain. And so they either have to get loaded with opiates or deal with the pain. But the problem when they're loaded with opiates is they can't deal with family. And I felt and had intuition that the opiates were actually causing more pain and actually more bone loss. And so I may show you a little bit of that. I'm going to probably run out of time on that. But anyway, the idea was to look at cannabinoids, and I'm going to show you sort of why to look at cannabinoids. But again, part of this talk is also just to make you realize that a medical marijuana plant has over 500 different chemicals in it. And so I don't want you to judge cannabis or marijuana based off really one substance, and you'll see I put a little thing on there. THC, right? That's what everybody judges on, because tetrahydrocannabinol is the thing that actually does produce the euphoria. It is the one thing that can be rewarding, can lead to some addictive behaviors. Is it different than, and people always ask me, is it different than opiates or methamphetamine, cocaine? Of course it is, okay? It's not as addictive as those, but it can be. But at the same time, Coca-Cola can be addictive, or caffeine, or even certain foods, you know, so there's all kinds of different things. But the point is that there's, let's just say if there's 537 chemicals, one of them is THC, there's 536 chemicals we don't know a whole lot about. And we don't know if they'll be very helpful or not helpful, right? Yeah, maybe there's a little bit of data on CBD, but not much. Almost all the publications are on THC. And then people extrapolate, this is THC, so then they say, well, this is medical marijuana. And I think all of you are smart enough to realize that that's not medical marijuana. And could you remove the THC, get rid of the euphoric effect? If some of you don't like the smell, you can remove that, because that's just simply one of these terpenes. You see terpenes on there? That's one of the chemical families that gives it the smell, that's all it is. So it's in turpentine, it's in many other things too. But you can remove that, that's just the smell. But there are many other types of chemicals in there that might be helpful. So, and then the other part that I want you to think about, and you guys can tell other people, because people are always shocked about this, but your own body and my body all make cannabinoids. So we make cannabinoids, we make it all the time. It's actually one of the things that we make the most, way more than the endorphins that you hear about, which is your opiate. And many, many cells will actually make cannabinoids because it comes right out of the lipid bilayer. And so this is kind of the new science of the cannabinoid field, and the fact that now we can actually do research on it a little bit more than we have in the past, because even though it's federally illegal, we now get grants to do this, and I'm lucky enough to have one of those grants. But the point is that cannabinoids come from lipids directly out of the membrane, and it's almost in every cell we look, your cells can actually make its own cannabinoid. It just makes it through some enzymes, so there's a PLC and a DAGL, these are just lipases. And what they do is they convert it and it makes it into what you guys will soon know as the endogenous cannabinoid. This is what's becoming more well known. It's called 2-AG or 2-arachidonoglycerol. It's just a lipid. But it works really well at the cannabinoid receptors, and that's what this is up here. There's two types really, 1 and 2. And it works really well there, and people are just starting to realize that, hey, when this works there, number one, it doesn't produce that euphoric effect of getting high, and it must be doing something, right? I don't think our bodies would produce all kinds of cannabinoid receptors if it was useless or was just waiting to get high with. And so you think, okay, what's it actually doing? Well, there's a lot of things that are being studied for, and what I can tell you is that pharma wants to sort of increase the amount of 2-AG for many different diseases, and I'll show you the list. And it's doing this by blocking the enzymes that break it down. So it's a lipid, and there's these two enzymes that are popular in the fact that they're in most cells also, and they decrease the 2-AG. And so now pharma says, okay, we can do this, and let's put clinical trials out there for all of these things. And so, and the list goes on. What they're looking at for pain and inflammation, what they're looking for migraine, cancer, epilepsy, TBI, obsessive compulsive, because they're in so many cells and it's doing things that they may be important. Let me give you just one, because I could go through examples for each one, but what they have recently found, does anybody suffer from migraines in here? Yeah, so migraine's pretty common, right? What they found is that in migraineurs, in humans, if they pull plasma from them, they have much, much lower levels of 2-AG as compared to somebody who doesn't have migraine. And so your body may be making less 2-AG or maybe metabolizing it faster. And that's the thing that we don't know yet. But there's a very nice correlation with that, and our own studies over at the U of A campus have now shown that, as well as in humans, that yes, there may be actually reduction of levels of 2-AG that might lead to whatever your trigger is, because many of you that have migraines, raise your hand if I have triggers, may actually induce that migraine. So that's just one example. I could go through all of those, but we don't have time for that. The body makes the receptors. You always have to remember, you're all scientists in here, at least I think you're all scientists in here, and you think that if the body makes this lipid, and the body makes the receptors, it must do something, right? It's not just waiting there until you get to high school and you smoke a joint. It's got to be there for something, right? And I always tell people, like, yes, that's one of the things it will do, but let's think about this rationally and think, why does the liver or other parts of the body, the heart, or wherever you want to go, you can go just whatever, why does it make the receptors? What is it normally doing? And is it the same in all of us? Or is there differences? And so this is some of the research that I do, is trying to look at what are the CD1 receptors, which we know in the brain will produce the psychotropic effects, but they're all over the body. We don't know what they're doing. There's another receptor called the CD2 receptor. It does not produce psychotropic effects when it's activated. What does that mean? You don't get the high feelings or anything else when you activate that receptor. And so we're still sort of at a loss of what these receptors do and what the cannabinoids do. Why cancer pain? Well, I'm not going to be able to show you all my data, I'm not out of time, but I was interested in cannabinoids, and this happened many years ago, in which we were noticing that they work really well for pain. And so we showed that a certain type of cannabinoid that worked at the CD2 receptor was working really well for pain. Another group over in Israel were showing that it worked really well for osteoporosis on the bone. And so I dug in and found that these osteoclasts, these are the cells that chew away bone, osteoblasts build bone, I love that, so blast builds and osteoclasts destroy. Well, these osteoclasts are loaded with CD2 receptors. And so then I just asked the question, why, right? That's what I love about science. You're like, why are they there? What are they doing? Come to find out, if you activate them, you can decrease bone loss. And I thought, perfect. We showed that it works for pain in like models of inflammation and neuropathic. It also will decrease bone loss, which is another reason why people have such terrible pain in metastatic cancers. So I thought, would this work in a metastatic cancer model? So of course you have to design a model. This is a mouse. Femur here, so we have to develop a model of metastatic cancer. And so what we do is we anesthetize the mouse. You go in, anybody wants to do surgery, this is fun, so we get a lot of med students that want to come work in the lab because they want to practice on the mouse. And so they'll do an arthrotomy, and they'll drill a small little hole there in the femur, and they actually implant cancer cells. So in our case, it's metastatic breast cancer cells. And then we seal it up, and what you'll see is that over a few days, the cancer grows, it starts to degrade the bone, the animal shows you signs of pain, and of course, then we start treating the animal. Say, can we treat this animal with something like a cannabinoid to inhibit the pain? I won't take you through all of this, but this is one of the grad students that first did this with me years ago. Works over at Roche now in Montana. But what we showed was that, of course, this is just measurements of pain. You just think of flinching as actual pain, and I'll show you what the bone looks like. This is what happens by day 14 after you put the cancer cells in with lots of pain, and this is what happens with the different cannabinoids. Now, again, this is a cannabinoid that doesn't produce psychotropic effects. It doesn't even affect the CNS a whole lot, and it reduces the amount of pain and inflammation. What's interesting is when you start to see what happens in the actual bone itself. And so you can see, here's the femur. So anybody wants to be a radiologist or going to med school, you'll start looking at these things and start using, okay, this is cortical bone. The whiter, the more dense the bone. You can see this is where the hip is, this is the knee, there's a kneecap right there. And so, and you start to see that there's trabecular bone and cortical bone. And this is what you see in the cancer model. So this is a mouse with metastatic cancer. And so you can see now, hopefully you can start to appreciate, see how there's more black in here? That means the bone's gone. And that's exactly what happens in metastatic cancer. And so you start to see less and less bone, close to almost a bone fracture here, which means that you lose it through the cortical area. You can see here, and you know that at some point it must have fractured through because you can start to see that this kneecap has moved up. What does that mean? That means that the cancer is now leaking out of the bone. It's growing so fast. And so it starts to push the cap out, which again, this is a painful situation. Well, this is the cannabinoid treatment. And so doesn't that bone look much better? And so I was surprised. I had no clue what would happen, but we knew that when we treated with this, it was going to inhibit those osteoclasts, and so we had much less bone loss, and we had much less pain. And so you can see this really nicely on a micro CT. So this is, again, just a fancy x-ray that goes around quickly and gets you a bunch better images. This is what normal bone looks like. So you can see now very good cortical bone, trabecular bone. And this was what you can see in a cancer model. This is what happens in metastatic cancer. Here you can see the fracture, and then this is the one treated with the cannabinoid. We only gave him 1 dose a day for 7 days, and that's how much better the bone looks. We went in to sort of say what happens then when a patient is put on chronic opiates. As I said, and I don't have time to go through this, but what I can share with you, and we just published this data, is that chronic opiates, which is what every patient gets, they get that plus a bisphosphonate for the bone, that the opiates are actually causing the bone loss. And now we think we figured out the mechanism. But chronic opiates in metastatic cancer, not in normal individuals, at least I haven't shown that in normal individuals, but in metastatic cancer, the opiates start to actually cause more bone loss. And guess what it's doing? It's increasing the number of osteoclasts. And so that's what all of this would actually show you. I can't have time to go through all this data, but we actually showed that there was an increase. And this actually even shows you here that the morphine here, you can see this real quick, these are on the actual cells, the osteoclasts. When you give morphine, which is an opiate, with something that sort of activates osteoclasts, you can see there was a huge increase in the number of the actual osteoclasts. And so we believe that the opiates are actually starting to cause the bone pain. And it may be one of the reasons why. If you ever think, like when a patient goes on an opiate, and then after 2 or 3 weeks the opiate stops working, right? What do we call that? Tolerance, right? And when you think about this, and I love this, this always goes back to when I was a student, and I remember somebody told me about tolerance. You know, tolerance is going to happen. You have to be more open. And I thought, what is tolerance? What is that? Because, you know, all the doctors will say it, and, you know, I love the MDs. They're great. They're my students. But they always say, yeah, it happens. I'm like, well, what is it? Oh, yeah, you know, downregulation receptors. I'm like, that doesn't happen in opiates. I've studied opiates for years, and you can give all the opiates you want. There's no downregulation of the receptor. And they're like, really? I'm like, no. So what is tolerance? I think that tolerance, and if anybody studies pain, you'll realize that pain is a very important thing in our bodies for survival. If you don't sense pain, you don't survive. And I don't know if any of you guys know, there's a rare genetic disorder of kids who don't feel pain, and they usually don't live past teenager years. I think it's our body. What tolerance is our body makes pain. It starts making more pain. The more opiate you give, the more pain it starts making. So what do? You give more. Unfortunately, the doctor just gives more opiate. But the body figures out, hey, this is not good, because if I can't feel pain, things are going to happen. I'm going to get internal damage, bones broken, I'll end up dying. So it's interesting, and nobody really understands what tolerance is. But I believe that one of the things is that it starts producing pain, and this is one of the ways. And this is just a bunch of references to show you that it's been shown now in humans that increasing opiates will cause spontaneous fractures and increase osteoporosis and bone loss. So I just want to do one more slide if I have time. I know that John's going to push me out here. So what happens to the breast cancer? I think that was the other thing I needed to answer. So it looked like the cannabinoid was inhibiting the pain. It looks like it's decreasing the bone loss. What is happening to the cancer? I had to make sure it wasn't going to increase cancer, right? I don't want to cause increased proliferation of cancer. And so the student went to the lab. These are the cancer cells here in a dish. When she puts the cannabinoid on there, you can see it actually started killing the cancer cells. And so it reduced it. So this was a complete surprise. This is why I love research, because you never know what's going to happen. I thought something bad could happen, but it actually was going to be wonderful. When you go to the bone, you see much less. Now this is an animal with metastatic cancer, and you can see here are all the cancer cells. These are actually breast cancer cells, the lighter ones. The darker ones are hematopoietic cells, the blood cells that normal bone makes. And here you can see much more hematopoietic and much less cancer cells. This was actually given to us by the pathologist. And then you can actually see the growth in mice. So when you start giving the cannabinoid to the mice, you can see that the tumor size is much smaller. So this is actually a tumor. These are breast cancer cells. Now they're actually given into the breast cancer, or into the mammillary pad of a mouse. And this just shows you the growth of cancer. Metastatic cancer, breast cancer grows fast. And so you can see it's not only grown all over, it's gone into bone, it's gone up to the lung in a vehicle-treated animal, but when you give this cannabinoid, you actually see a significant decrease. It didn't kill it, so it's not a chemotherapeutic, but it slowed the proliferation. And so again, these are all just sort of surprise studies that we did when we did these studies. So, and it was all characterized. And so I won't go through all the other stuff for you, but we've got many other types of studies ongoing that are looking at cannabinoids to see what type of problems they might produce, especially in adolescents. And so we're looking at whether the different types of cannabinoids might produce cognitive outcomes, because I don't want to deny the fact that some cannabinoids can cause trouble. As you should all know, that all drugs have side effects and they all produce some problems. And so I want to be very responsible to sort of make sure that what are the issues that we might have, knowing the fact that people could be using these even when they're pregnant. And so we're looking at that, like I said, here in pregnant mice as well, and looking at outcomes and cognitive outcomes of the neonates. And then we also look at things like epilepsy for CBD. We have a clinical trial in the cancer because that was the most successful, so we went right into a clinical trial. Only 14 patients, so when you first do it, and I have to pay for it, I had to reduce the number of patients, but we actually showed that the cannabinoid could actually reduce the pain. These were patients that, as most of you know, you can't deny a patient treatment for pain. And so these patients had the choice of taking the opiate along with the cannabinoid or vehicle, it didn't matter. And so the ones that took the cannabinoid, they had the choice of either reducing their opiate or not. Almost all of them reduced it, or I should say all of them reduced. I think half of them completely went off all the opiates, and they felt much better. And so it was a good success. And we actually even saw an increase in their bone. It's a strange marker you have to use. You have to use a collagen that comes out of the bone that comes in the serum. But anyway, they had actually much better bone strength after that too. So it's nice to actually do your studies in animals and take it all the way into a clinical trial to see how that goes. And so with that, again, lots of people have worked in the lab and lots of collaborators to put projects like that together. But and I want to recognize that all of them have been really helpful in that. And thank you for being such a great audience. I'll take some questions.
You guys have 8 minutes to ask awesome questions.
Where do you think it's easiest to find your publications?
Where is it easiest to find?
Like your publications.
To find my publications, just my name. If you just go into PubMed, you guys use PubMed? Yeah, just go in there and type in Vanderah with a T. And most of those are all mine. There's one other T in there who does some kind of astrophysics stuff. So when you see that, you know that's not me. Chemistry was enough for me. Other questions? No? Sure.
I guess, have you identified any like serious and significant off-target effects of using like the cannabinoid treatments? Like there must have to be an effect of inhibiting the osteoblasts.
Yes, so there is. That's a great question. What are the off-target side effects of something like a cannabinoid? In our case with CD2 receptors, they're found on immune cells. And the biggest side effect may be inhibition of immune cell activity. And so you have to always be worried about when you decrease immune cells that you then increase the possibilities of infections. And so it's kind of interesting, like chemotherapeutics, the one big side effect for most of those, besides knowing if they actually lose your hair, because those are rapidly dividing cells, right? The hair in the gut is the immune cells. And so it's the same type of thing that you might think, it's not as potent as chemotherapeutics, but they, whenever a person's put on a chemotherapeutic, you're also worried about them catching things like tuberculosis or any type of serious infections. And so that would be the first thing that we've noticed. With the specific CD2 though, I'll tell you this, is that there was a much bigger clinical trial ran on the CD2 agonist by Lilly and by GW Pharmaceuticals. And of course, the first thing I looked at is that what was their problems, and they had no real significant side effects in both studies. So, and they were very tolerable. So, making sure a drug's tolerable is a big thing in clinical trials because at any time the patient can drop out, and you always have to report the dropouts. And so, but in that case, they had very few dropouts, mainly usually because the person didn't want to discontinue because of going to get the drug. But they had very, very few side effects. And so, based on that, many pharmaceutical companies became very interested. So then there was a follow-up study by another company in San Diego for Crohn's, for IBD and IBS, and so that looked very positive as well. Great question. Other cannabinoids have other side effects though. I'll tell you that. So, and again, you can't put this one just to all that one, because THC has some other side effects, some cognitive outcome side effects. Other questions? Oh yeah.
So you mentioned that you were mainly looking at breast metastases. Why?
Yeah, so it's a great question, why? And sometimes it's just because it's technical, because we also have a little bit on prostate, but because we had good cells for breast cancer, for mouse, when you do these kind of things, when people study cancer, a lot of times they'll use human cancer, which is more relevant, but then they put those human cancer cells in what's called a nude mouse. What does that mean? A nude mouse simply means it is immunodeficient. I didn't want to do that because I think it's the immune system that actually is causing the pain, the inflammation, and the activation of the osteoclasts. And so it would take away my mechanism. So I wanted to make sure I just used what I would call a normal mouse, and then use a mouse cancer cell line and put it into that same mouse so that you can use a totally immune competent mouse and then look to see if the outcome. And the best one that we had was some, happened to be breast cancer cells. I was going to do either lung cancer or breast cancer. My father passed away from lung cancer. I was more interested, but we couldn't find the good cell lines for that. So, but those breast cancer is the most popular or most common in women, and so that's why I wanted to also do that. So, other questions? Huh?
So if you had like a serious fracture and had surgery to repair it, and you were given like an extended prescription of opiates, could that actually heal or slow the healing of the fracture?
Yeah, that's a great question. Anyone interested in ortho? So I got tons of people with ortho in my lab. So they want to know all that. So there's different models where they look at bone fractures and bone healing. And there's no doubt that opiates will slow that. We also know that NSAIDs, what are NSAIDs? Things like ibuprofen, they all slow bone healing. But yet, the number one thing that they give a person who fractures a bone, if anybody's fractured a bone, is Vicodin, Percocet, it's an opiate. Along, sometimes with an NSAID, because that's what those are, Percocets and Vicodins are mixtures of opiates and NSAIDs. So, the ortho guys, they still have to give them something. This is the problem. So they're debating of what do we do, what do we give them, and how fast can we get them off this so that we get better bone healing. In the meantime, they're in my labs sort of studying bone healing and bone fracture to come up with something else. And of course, they've been looking at these cannabinoids. So, great question.
So for your study, you were specifically looking at CB2, and do you have plans to look at any other cannabinoids?
Yes, so we have quite a few different studies ongoing to look at different types of cannabinoids, and also looking at cannabinoids in combination. That's where the real power is. We have realized, and that's why I didn't get to show you, but there's all kinds of synergy when you're combining cannabinoids with other types of things that are in the plant. And again, Dr. Stryker over in pharmacology does a lot of that, mixing with different terpenes and other chemicals that are in there to sort of see. I've done a lot of work to look at how cannabinoids can be combined with opiates to decrease opiate problems and issues. And I didn't get a chance to show you, but we all know that opiates are addictive, right? We have an opiate epidemic. And I can easily show in studies where we use a rodent again to show that the animal becomes addicted to opiates. If you add on the cannabinoid, it actually doesn't. It stops the addiction component of the opiate. And it even stops the dopamine release. Of course, that's the euphoric effect is dopamine in the brain. It actually prevents that. And so that's been picked up by people at NIH, in which they've been looking at now these cannabinoids for addictions, not just to opiates, which I did, but they looked at it for cocaine and methamphetamine as well. More questions? So the main story that I hopefully you all walk away with is to realize that we don't know much about cannabinoids. They've been federally illegal for a long time. There's not much out there. So could they be dangerous? Yes. I'm not here to say that they're safe, but could there be something in these plants that actually may be helpful for people? We should also think that maybe that answer is yes also. Okay, thank you.